Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This episode of CTO Confessions is brought to you by the one and only IT Labs. And your host today is me, TC Gill, IT Labs Chief Talking Officer, and I'm speaking from London, UK.
So, Guy, welcome to CTO Confessions. It's great to have you on board, sir.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure being here today.
Brilliant, brilliant. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And who do you work for?
So I'm currently a senior director at a biotechnology company called Immunai. We're combining biological data and machine learning to produce actionable insights for the pharmaceutical industries. We're helping big name pharmas to accelerate the clinical and preclinical stage drug development and delivery.
Brilliant. That sounds fascinating.
Thanks a lot. And my background is in computer engineering and biology. That's what I've been doing for the past 20 years. Started my way at Columbia University, did my undergrad over there. And right after college, I actually hooked up with some genomics researchers at the university and really got fascinated with the genomics field that was just coming out and becoming very popular. That was right after the Genome Project, or the first human genome that was published in the early 2000s, and there was a great need, both in academia and in industry, to be able to analyze this data. I joined a research lab that basically built the whole infrastructure and the whole research methodologies on how to approach this data, because nobody has ever done this before. So I joined this lab, and together we figured it out for a few years on how can we get some insights, some actionable insights out of this data. And throughout that experience, I also learned on how I can actually bring some application or some practical knowledge, practical engineering knowledge into the process of research. And throughout my career, that's basically what I've been doing, bringing practical knowledge into scientific research.
That's fascinating. I love the fact that you are bridging these kind of two worlds, actually. You come from this very kind of learned space, where there's lots of, I guess, you're kind of building blocks of knowledge in the kind of academic space. But then there's kind of, how do you bring that into the world and actually make it kind of practical and make a difference? So that's quite an interesting bridge to kind of sit in, really.
So it's a very interesting place to be at, because as many people probably know, there's a very different mindset in academia or in the research world, whereas a much more practical thinking in industry. However, the two worlds are very much interconnected. They need each other. Academia is the place where ideas are born, and we kind of like experiment with many new ideas, many new technologies, many new breakthroughs. Also, the people that grow up in academia at some point move to industry. And in industry, we're really bringing those ideas to bear, and we actually, build products, and we change the world through companies or through application of those ideas. So there's definitely a lot of interaction. However, it is quite a gap because of the different nature of those two worlds, and being in the middle and kind of like figuring out how to bridge the two, I think for me was very, very helpful. I actually consider this a superpower to be able to bridge those two worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And personally speaking myself, I've spent many years in engineering, with electronics and software engineering and leading teams. I have a fascination to actually get back into academia. I'd love to be part of that story of building up those building blocks of knowledge. I call it the cutting edge of knowledge. But have you ever come across anybody that actually wants to do that and get back into the academic space?
All the time. Yeah, first of all, myself, I've been in and out of academia, did an undergrad, then did a master's degree, did a PhD later on, and in between I was starting companies. So this kind of like non-standard career path, I guess. I've been going in and out of academia. Also, I would say that for my team members, there's always like a one software developer or two that are always thinking about going back to academia. And that's something that I always try to support, being able to kind of like play in both fields, doing part-time academia and staying with us for a while. I do think that it's basically it's a personal growth that is important for people. And also, I always find it like as a booster for the team, because in academia, they really bring in their knowledge, like their cutting edge knowledge, like if they experiment with new technologies or with new approaches that we in industry either don't have the time or too conservative to go to. We actually have this playing field through people that go back to academia and tell us about it.
As you were describing that, you hear about people having sabbaticals, obviously in academia, but I've heard more and more people doing them actually in industry as well. And I guess this is the opportunity to have a rest from what you've been doing, because, it can get a little bit intense when you've been doing something for too long. But having that rest and allowing the mind to relax and just kind of take in some more information, I think, to be pollinated with new ideas. So I think this is a fantastic thing for leaders to do, more leaders to do, to have that period, that kind of sprint, I'm going to use the agile term, in industry, and then go back and do a sprint in academia to kind of develop their knowledge base back up again. And also that pollination kind of works the other way as well. It kind of gives academia that kind of insight as to actually what's going on out there and what's useful.
Yes, absolutely. And, I wish that I would have the time to take a pause out of industry. But unfortunately, in this very fast company where I'm at right now, I wouldn't be able to do that. But I think that I was fortunate enough to be able to still stay somewhat in academia while keeping my day job, because I'm also teaching at the university. I also have a course that has been running for 10 years. And luckily, this is a course that allows me to continue my day-to-day job while also engaging with students and actually engaging with learning and engaging with learning new approaches, learning new technology and experimenting with this, and doing this cross-pollination that you referred to. This is something that I very much enjoy doing, and I think that it's also very, very beneficial for myself as a leader, because it really keeps me engaged with the subject matter and also opens up the way of thinking. Like, if I would just do industry, I think that I wouldn't be exposed to so many new opinions and new directions as much as I'm exposed to right now.
Fantastic. That's really, really good. And any interesting stories living between these kind of two worlds? Have you got any stories that you can tell us? Any stories that you like to confess that the audience would find fascinating?
So I guess I have a couple of stories here. One of them is a more of like a fun story. The other one is really about how does those two seemingly separate worlds actually meet together in interesting and sometimes even bizarre ways. But I'll start with the fun story. So the course that I'm teaching is really focused about building data-driven application, combining everything that you would find in a startup, meaning that you'd find agile teams working in agile methodology and collaborating together to build in the first phases of an MVP. And this is kind of like what we've been doing over the years. And in one of the semesters, one of the projects that we wanted to explore was looking at all the data of a famous TV show. For those that have heard about the Game of Thrones, the famous HBO franchise from a few years back then, the show plot itself was not very predictable. Every once in a while, the plot twists would be very, very wild, including some of the main characters actually being eliminated. And one of the things that we've done in the course was to look at all the data that was available from the show, and this show has actually generated quite a lot of data, and actually designing a machine learning algorithm that allows you to predict the plot, more specifically predict which of the characters would be eliminated next. That was a fun thing to do, because basically, if you think about this, we basically built a product, and the product itself was a web-driven application that lets Game of Thrones enthusiasts kind of like go in and get an insight to what is going on in the show, what could be coming next. And building this product was fantastic and really, really exhilarating, because we really did it as kind of like a startup that is living in academia. We had about 40 developers working day and night within a period of like 6-9 weeks, something of that nature, starting from scratch. We had nothing other than blueprints, and really building this entire thing up. Even the most amazing thing was that towards the end, where we actually had predictions and results, and we wanted to publish, we built a media team that reached out to news outlets and told them, like, listen, there's like next season of Game of Thrones is coming up, and there was like a big cliffhanger about one of the characters, and we have what we thought was a pretty confident prediction about what's going to happen with this character. And the media team was very successful in getting the attention of news media across the world. Immediately, it was published in many high profile news outlets. Then it happened to coincide with the beginning of this very talked about season, so that we had a lot of the spotlight. Basically, the product was an insane hit. We had millions of people entering the webpage daily on that. So it was a very, very interesting and fun experience to have. And that I think is really, how do you bring the practicality of how you build a product in industry, but try it out in a learning settings in academia. And I have to say that also for the students themselves, the experience was very exhilarating. One of the symptoms were that I saw them, pulling all-nighters just to get the thing done. They already got the A, right? They already got high scores, but they were still working on this because they had this very high dedication for the product itself.
Yeah, I think the learning I take from that, first of all, well done on the project. That's a fascinating project to work on. It's almost like a hackathon, but taken to another level, And the thing that I'm taking away from that is that when people really feel the purpose of what we're trying to develop, it really kind of raises the human spirit to make it happen, I think that's a great takeaway for myself and many tech leaders out there, is to get people really aligned to the purpose and the fun of what we're doing, the outcome that we're trying to create. Because, that is a really interesting one. And was it very good at predicting the outcomes that people wanted to know about?
It was the only algorithm out there that accurately predicted, I think, like 7 out of 10 elimination in that season. Yeah, including the biggest cliffhanger as well.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant. In fact, interesting. I have watched the series myself, and it is a great series. My daughter's asked to watch it again from the beginning now, so we kind of know what's happening there. We've already done the predicting, but that's really good. And you mentioned another story, the second story.
So the second story is really about pulling some insights from what I like to call, like, what we do in academia. For me, it's kind of like a startup lab. It's not just about experimenting with new technologies. It's really experimenting about how to approach big questions that we do have in industry, but it's kind of like we don't have the time or the capacity to solve. So for me, I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. I can actually bring, a big topic that we have in our daily work, bring it back to the academic settings, and just try different methodologies, try different approaches on how do we build a certain product, or how do we build a certain team. I would give an example. So one of our teams has been very, very constrained on resources and has been trying to switch technologies while still keeping a product alive. And this is, I'm sure, a problem that many leaders confronted. Basically, you're low on resources, you have business goals to meet, and you have to bridge a situation where you're also trying to onboard into new technologies. So, you've got constraints running from all over the place. How do you solve for this? So, of course, you can always try to hire, to bring in outside help, whatever. But for us, it was just like, it wasn't an opportunity. So I was able to kind of like try as a research ground, or as a playground, as a sandbox, if you will, play with the idea of trying different approaches and seeing which one has been most effective and which one can create the most impact before I actually go and implement it back in my team. Had 3 teams basically approach 3 different methodologies and basically running a simulation of the same constraint. And we've learned a lot from this experience, because basically what we've seen is that the way to the kind of like optimize for those constraints that we have was not as difficult as we thought that it would be. Actually had some breakthroughs. They actually came from two separate teams, and then we kind of like melded them together and implemented it back in the workplace, which have shown us to be what is the right way forward here.
Fantastic. Well done on that. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. And as a tech leader, and again, you know, in the context of you being in academia, because you've got to lead in academia as well. You know, you got your teams, you got your students, and also in industry. Obviously, we have teams and we've got to create outcomes. What are the lessons that you've learned and what's worked for you as a leader that you'd like to share here as a lesson to us all?
I'll start with something that is a little bit specific to my area of specialty. I'm not sure that it's like generally applicable, but I'll start with this, at least for those leaders that actually work with a lot of academic types. I hope that this would resonate. Of course, you have a lot of academic types like, you know, the masters, the PhDs, the postdocs that make the move from academia to industry. And of course, these are brilliant people. They have a lot of knowledge. They're domain experts, you know, world-class domain experts. And the challenge there is to make sure that you manage to get the potential that is in them, like leverage the potential that those people have. But of course, they're used to certain way of work in academia. And I would say that one thing that I noticed that is quite frequent in academia is that, and especially in, you know, for the PhDs and the postdocs, it is a very solitary kind of like a one-man or one-woman show when it comes to working on your research. Sometimes, of course, there is a collaboration because collaboration is required, but at the end of the day, it's less about teamwork. It's mostly about what you can bring in. And if you don't activate yourself, most likely nothing would happen.
Self-leadership, isn't it, really?
Self-leadership, exactly. And that's what I've noticed is that the same mindset, which is working great in academia, it's basically, you know, kind of like the workhorse of academia is the those self-leaders there that are sitting in a lab, talking to their supervisor, coming up with ideas of like what they want to research, and once they get a green light to work on this, it's up to them to get there. So whenever they're trying to bring this mindset into industry, one of the biggest frustrations that I keep on seeing is their attempt to self-lead a project, to self-lead an effort, to actually get or complete an end-to-end work just by themselves. You know, not because they don't get the team mentality, because that's how they were used to work. They think, you know, it's clear to me what I need to do from A to Z to get to those results. But, you know, in industry, it's different. In industry, you have to collaborate with people. You have to, first of all, justify what you're doing for basically to hit some business goals. You cannot just waste time experimenting in many ways. And in industry, of course, the roles and responsibilities are well more defined than they are in academia. And this is a very different mindset that people find when they transition from academia to industry. And it's a major challenge. It's a major challenge that basically causes a lot of people to not get to their optimal potential when they do this transition. Creates a lot of frustration. It could create a lot of friction amongst the team, and sometimes, you know, in the worst case, that some of those academic types would transition back to academia without reaching their biggest potential. So fortunately for me, I think that I was able to sit kind of like in between those two worlds and really, first and foremost, do the translation work for both sides, for the people that, you know, kind of like grew in industry and have their way of work to be able to fully communicate and collaborate with the academic types. They need to basically understand the motivation and understand where those people are coming from and, you know, how to best collaborate with them. And same way for the academic types. When they make this transition, I think that there is an expectation that somehow this transition would happen by itself without giving the proper runway and the proper onboarding for those people to get into the habits. Usually, it's very common that you would see some new postdoc or some new PhD or somebody who's been in academia for a while land in a company, and they're brilliant, and they get praised by the CEO and everybody else for their brilliance, and the expectation is that they would bring value almost as soon as they just land there because they're brilliant and they would figure everything out. What I've learned is that you really have to create the correct runway for that talent. You have to create the right environment. You have to explain the nuances of what is industry like versus academia to really place the principles that you're used to in academia, really place them against the principles that people in industry are working by, and really create this translation and putting the efforts for making this transition be worthwhile. And this comes down to almost everyday decisions that you have to make, like who to pair with that person. It's not too different than onboarding any new employee into the organization in some ways, but in other ways it is very, very vastly different, because there is kind of like getting used to work in a completely different mindset. I think that, kind of like adjusting the clock for the academic types versus the industry types, as first of all, you have to, on one end, slow the academic type expectations of, how much we're going to get in a certain period of time, because, it does require collaboration. Collaboration takes longer. But on the other hand, when you set smaller goals and you said kind of like, let's work on this in a sprint, then one of the advantages is then where you take the people that came from academia and you kind of like narrow their goals and you're really, really focusing them on the target. Then all of a sudden their estimation of like, it's going to take me 5 months to complete is all of a sudden becoming like a sprint or two. There's a lot of like, small nuances that you have to take into account. It is a bit like, or falls under onboarding, but it is a very, very specialized onboarding. It's a very special one. I think it makes a difference about the success and failure of such a new employee into the organization.
That's a great lesson, great learning there. And it's interesting to see those different worlds of how they do come to complement each other in a way, because I think, the topic of self-leadership and being able to work on your own and get stuff done is really, really important. And obviously the dynamic of how we come together as a team and then deliver that as well. So fascinating. It's good to see that you're kind of sitting in this bridge and helping those kind of transitions from either side. Here's a question for you. What's the thing that keeps you up at night as a tech leader? What's the pain point that seems to be in your space?
It's always development costs. It's always like the cost and velocity of the team. We're confronted, specifically the domain that I'm at, but I think it's also like it would apply to pretty much all the domains out there. We're confronted with questions that haven't necessarily been solved yet and haven't necessarily been even explored yet, and yet we're required still be able to deliver based on the business goals. We're kind of like starting the quarter saying we're going to be able to, let's say, scale up the operation 2 or 3 folds, and we're saying this. And for me specifically, I'm working with data. I'm working basically this is a biotech that is very much a big data biotech company. And it is my role to make sure that the big data is valuable at scale for the company. But oftentimes that data is completely unpredictable and sometimes even completely new. And on the one hand, as a business executive, I have to deliver on the business goals. But on the other end, I do have an exploratory fashion to this, and trying to kind of like bring those two together is basically what keeps me at night. And I guess that's kind of like the two knobs that I'm trying to play with is basically the ability for my team to deliver a cost, to deliver basically at the predicted cost that we want to have, and also ensure that the team velocity is what is expected from it. And of course, this all of this just flows into many, many different small parameters that you have to play with. But yeah, that's kind of like the biggest things.
It makes me think of the fast pace of technology moving, because you're not only working in, software engineering, you're in a space of engineering which is developing all the time. You've got AI and all that stuff going on, but also you've got the bio stuff as well, which is probably shifting. So the kind of foundations are always kind of moving for you. How do you deal with that?
That's an excellent question, and thanks a lot for bringing up the fact that it's called like I think technology acceleration. I heard it once. The concept is basically, the more we develop, the quicker the pace of technology's advancement. This is a major constraint in many, many different ways. We'll start with the most trivial ones. You hire for certain skills, you hire for the ability to execute while the ground keeps on shifting underneath. You're building entire platforms with stacks that what you would think that there would be future proofs. But, what is the future? The future keeps on moving and the future may become unpredictable. So the way that we try to kind of like mitigate for this very fast-paced technology advancements is to be very coherent in the technology story that we're building here. At the end of the day, we know what we want the technology to do. We don't necessarily know how it would do it, but we know what we want the technology to do. And, the very high level, we want to be able to analyze large amounts of biological data that is coming in and be able to produce those insights at scale. And also, we know that basically the insights could be varied, could change. And we know that the data itself is very shifty. And we know that the technology today, the state of the art could be a big data or the current AI model. Tomorrow it could be something else. So, having said all that, you have to create this agility within the team and even beyond that, beyond the team itself, to be able to respond fast to changes. And we usually do this by picking technologies that would also easily adapt, by allowing the team members to also get exposed to those new technologies fairly fast so we can actually onboard them. We also hire with this agility in mind to be able to get developers that are not just, I'm a React person, or I'm just like a Python guy, or I'm just like a Snowflake guy. We're trying to get people that are excited and curious about technology and about our domain. And that is very, very helpful. It makes everything much more agile and much more adaptable to the constantly changing landscape that we work in.
Excellent. That's kind of coming back to the kind of the agile kind of spirit of cross-functional teams, and it reminds me of something I speak to a lot of my, I work with quite a lot of leaders. It's around creating T-shaped people. Is that a term that you've heard before? T-shaped, yeah. And then you've got pie-shaped people, okay? So they're kind of like full stack. And then you've got cone-shaped people. They're like the amazing people that can do anything, and do it all. And I love the fact that you're putting expectation out there. Is that something that you put that expectation out there as you're employing people to make it very clear that, this is what we want and this is what we're trying to create here?
First of all, we're still a startup. We're a 5-year-old startup, but still very much a startup in mind, and we have to be. So this is an expectation that we're setting very early on with candidates and with new people that we bring in. We're also, again, looking for people that are very passionate about learning and very passionate about expanding their abilities and skill set. We do want to have, as you mentioned, like the T-shaped candidate or the T-shaped approach is very much characteristics to what we get in the team. Because on one end, you do get the specialization, but on the other end, you do get this broad perspective and the ability of people to move around quite a bit. Also, I would say that one of the points that we try to emphasize is try not to fall in love with a certain technology or with a certain technology stack and try to be able to be as agile as possible. Again, there's always a trade-off there by not pulling too much or not broadening the technology stack too much. But we do kind of like target people that would be able to jump between different technologies quite easily.
So Guy, again, on this topic of, the pain of being a tech leader, because there's a lot of going on, I can imagine it's a bit of a mind mess going on up there, because there's so much information. And with AI, having experience working in AI very early on in my university time, it requires a lot of data to kind of teach it. So what's that like? Because I have my own kind of fears of big data and working with data. How's it been for you?
For me, it has been exciting. I can see why it may be a little bit intimidating, but I think that overall, being able to take vast amount of data and try to make sense of it all is, for me, the analogy is like if we were trying to solve some problems with a flashlight, all of a sudden we got this huge projector that is showing us a much broader map than what we've thought the problem was like to begin with. And now we have to look at this very vast picture or map and try to be able to pick out patterns out of it. It's like with any other technology advancements, but there's definitely the intimidating sides or the scary sides or the dark side of technology. But of course, there's also the big promises. For us, the big promises is to be able to accelerate significantly the ability to discover life-saving treatments for cancer patients. And the way that we do this, or maybe if I'll jump into like how does this translate to our work in industry, we are basically harvesting big amounts of data, and we're trying many different machine learning models that will be able to figure out those patterns in this huge map that we were talking about. And many people, when they talk about AI or machine learning, they usually focus on the algorithm itself, the fact of like learning and being able to infer from the data, infer some meaningful and actionable insights. However, I think that the critical part is often being looked over, which is basically how do you generate, collect, and organize the data in a way that would make it even at the state that those algorithms could make sense of it. And I'll give an example. So let's say that you were trying to, let's say, predict the height of all British males based on age in adolescence. Okay. So what is the UK male population? We're talking about 20 million people. And then like the adolescent would be somewhere like around 5, I guess. I would just make an assumption here. We're talking about a vast amount of people. And now let's say that you decided that for the age, for if age is a predictor to what the height of that male candidate would be, how would you measure the age? Would you measure them in years, in months, in days? Would you use 6 months intervals, or would you use days or 3 days intervals? How would you do that? So of course you can take the data as is, as you get from the census office, and just feed it into an algorithm. That would be it. But then your algorithm would suffer from a bias to basically how you actually fed the data and what was the unit that you used for the age of the male. And when it comes to really efficient or productive algorithms, really the secret sauce is not on how do you train or what is the algorithm that you use to train, but really about if you figured out what is the right unit to measure the age and how to do it correctly and consistently across millions and millions or even trillions of records that you're getting out of that. Now I'll take that example, that very, very simple example, and now make it super complicated. We're measuring immune cells. We're measuring genes in the human body, and we're getting trillions of data points about that. Each of those data points you have to measure accurately. Each of those data points you also have to harmonize with other data points, so they all really speak the same languages. So when the model looks at them, it knows that they all speak the same languages, and it can start figuring out the pattern. Same way that if you would look at the map, you wouldn't be able to figure out patterns if some parts of your map would be measured in inches and the other one would be measured in centimeters, right? So we have to make sure that everything is at a pristine stage. This is hard work. This is definitely very, very much work of really accurate computer systems that are built to the smallest detail that software engineers, data engineers are able to come up with formalization. What is the machinery that would take this data that is coming from many different instruments and many different sources. Some of those are coming in inches, some of those are coming in centimeters, some of those are coming in unit of a day for an age, and some of those are coming with the unit of a year. I'm of course like simplifying. It's way more involved than this, and building up this huge map that all speaks the same language, that everything is according to standards, and everything is analysis ready. Analysis ready meaning that it can go into this machine learning algorithms that would start deciphering all the patterns that are available within the data. That is our challenge.
Yeah. Sounds like a huge challenge. And there's a lot of it as well. We're not talking a few kind of like numbers here and there. This is like vast stuff. My mind kind of shot off in all kinds of directions as you're describing that, because it's obviously the quality of the data. If you put in rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out, So it's got to be clean. It's got to be, I guess there's some way of being able to kind of go back and say, well, actually, we made this decision based on the data in this form, And the way in which you present the data has an impact on what can be seen. This reminded me, actually, going back to my electronics days, where we used to have these things called Z domains and S domains in the kind of engineering space. They were basically a kind of, you run a formula over it, and then you get a different representation of the data. So it was visualized in a very, very different way, but it would present itself in a very different way, which allow you to make kind of certain understandings from it in a certain kind of assumption. So I love this idea of re-representing the data in an abstracted way that allows you to see something that you probably couldn't see before, a pattern, or something.
Absolutely. And this is only part of the challenge. So you mentioned also the ability to go back from, whatever conclusion that you made, or the algorithm made a conclusion, and really point back to the data itself and saying kind of like, I saw this in point X, Y, and Z, and therefore I got to that conclusion. It requires you to be very, very disciplined in the way that you actually manage the data, because, the data goes into the algorithm. You have to make sure that you tracked it. What went in? When did it come in? Don't forget that data is a living thing. It constantly evolves and changes. So, I ran the algorithms 2 days ago. Well, that would be different data than, from when I ran it like a year ago. Because I might have extended the data. I might have added new points over there. So, you really have to be very disciplined in the way that you manage this data. A little bit more complex, or not a little bit, a lot of more complexity to this vast system that actually controls and manages this data.
And this is quite a new cutting edge field. It's not that well known. I do quite a lot of reading, so I'm kind of familiar with some of this stuff going on. But I imagine, coming back to your point around finding, you mentioned around development costs and finding the right people, et cetera. Do you find it quite easy to attract people into this space? Because I'm attracted to it because I find this fascinating. I'd be all in. How do you find that, getting talent into this space?
That's a very interesting question, because I think that in general, most of the tech talent is very much familiar with the ad space or the search space or the gaming space and the FinOps, the finance space. But the biotech space, I guess that they're familiar in very abstract terms. What does that mean? But when you're recruiting for dev talent into biotech, for them, it's almost a black box. What are we getting into? I heard that biotech is basically working with microscopes and pipettes. What does a software engineer have to do with all that? And on the one hand, it could be a little bit intimidating for talent. They may shy away from this because the domain itself is not clear, and it's not clear what the impact and the value for a talent would be. But on the other hand, and this is where we get very fortunate, is that this is a domain that you get to do really good in the world. The impact that our work has is about really bringing therapeutics into the market and saving lives. This is the end goal. And for the talent that we bring, most of them are very much connected to this mission. And you'd see that this is not just another tech job. This is not just another, let's move the bits from one place to another. They really are very much fascinated with the domain itself. It's not for everybody. It's not for the 9 to 5 crowd that is just looking for a paycheck, but it is because it requires you to maybe take a step further in understanding, kind of like exploring some concepts that are not available on your daily routine. So it does require a little bit more, but all in all, I think that it helps us attract a talent that is very curious, that is very ambitious, that really wants to learn and want to contribute and want to make an impact.
Excellent. Yeah. Hopefully there's some listening here right now and then they'll be getting in touch. But yeah, it sounds like a really exciting space, so good luck with finding the talent and growing your teams. And a question here I have for you. I love this question. I love this fun question, which is, I'm going to offer you a wish, Guy. Okay. A wish. I'm the tech genie for a second. Okay. I'm going to offer you a wish for your industry, your teams, your leadership. What would you wish for?
Bigger collaboration, dropping down silos. Our industry would benefit, and I don't want to sound too cheesy, but I think humanity would benefit from breaking down barriers between research centers and even between clinics. Our fields, I'm going back to the map analogy. We have been doing for the past few decades since the digital age came into medicine. We've been collecting vast amount of information. We've been collecting vast amount of data from research. Unfortunately, because of many different aspects, whether it's legal, commercial, regulatory, what have you, reasons, we still have silos. We still have fences between different organizations. If we could have figured out a way that we can collaborate while still staying competitive, while still staying impactful, while still staying private, while still staying within the boundaries of the legal realm, I think that in general, the whole field and again, people around the world would very much benefit from this, because we are going to basically be able to look at the entire map at one time and activate this super smart algorithms on top of this map and just accelerate the rate of therapeutics getting into people fast enough.
Beautiful. Here to collaboration. I absolutely agree with you. As a tech genie, I want to work on that to make that come true. Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So as we come to the final full stop of the podcast, unfortunately, Guy, what's your final key takeaway that you'd like to leave our tech leader audience out there as we part company?
I think that becoming a bridge as a leader, I think that becoming a bridge has been one of the most fulfilling aspects of my career. I really see myself as really bringing multiple disciplinaries or bringing, different types and different work methodologies, bringing them together, getting the most out of them, getting all the potentials that they can bring into the table. If you can become a bridge in your organization, I think that, first of all, you'd be more powerful as a tech leader. I think that your people are going to be benefiting from this quite a lot. And altogether, I think it's also very, very fulfilling and very satisfying.
Beautiful. What a wonderful note to finish on. Thank you for your time, guys. It's been great having you on CTO Confessions.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me.
And finally, remember to subscribe to CTO Confessions podcast and IT Labs newsletter, where you get regular tech articles and invites to the IT Labs webinar series. URLs for this can be found at the bottom of this page. We are consistently creating material to create, nurture and support a community of tech leaders. And of course, if you want to know more about IT Labs services, including our Teams as a Service service, please don't hesitate to get in touch. As mentioned in the intro, please think of us like tech leaders' favourite off-the-shelf service, providing agility, high-performing teams off that shelf with a wide breadth of skill and knowledge. Well, that's all, folks. Look after each other and keep safe. Wishing you all a good day or evening wherever you are in the world from all of us here at IT Labs. Live long, live well and prosper until we meet again on the next CTO Confessions podcast.